Yeah, you guys know that I can't read, so I watched Enter's review of Thundercats Roar, and he made a point I'm sure would cause some contention, which is that reboots should primarily appeal to fans of the original. Now, this is an argument that'll forever be controversial because you can easily bring up some pretty good examples of reboots or remakes of stuff that not only worked well as a result of making changes, but some would even claim they're better than the original. And while I agree that there are examples of that being the case, at the same time, I'm gonna have to side with Enter on this one. Now, I've made several other videos in the past sharing my stances in regards to reboots, but I think it's time I declare how I actually feel about readaptations as a whole. I generally don't approve them. I don't like the idea of repurposing properties, more so with reboots than remakes, and I'll explain later why, but I certainly do consider myself someone who finds these creative routes to be misguided. There's one argument that's often presented, which is the idea that it can help to introduce an old property to younger potential fans, and by repackaging it into something that better appeals to the sensibilities of modern audiences, it contributes to a larger pool of fans of that said property. And while I won't deny that it can do that, at the same time, I wouldn't consider that a worthwhile accomplishment, because if there's one thing I value more than popularity, it's legacy, which is something that can be tampered with the introduction of a readaptation that for many people might even serve as a replacement for the old original work. And while legacy is something that can also be affected by sequels and spin-offs, there's something particularly cunning about reboots and remakes because of their very nature that allows them to sidestep the responsibility of preserving the essential core and creative decisions of the original material, because now you can shield yourself with the argument that, oh, it's okay to make changes, it's unfair to compare it to the original, we should judge it for what it is. But at that point, we kinda have to ask ourselves, what is the fucking point of readapting it in the first place? I'm not against all changes, and I don't always think that original works are wholly perfect and don't require some touching reworks or just complete resets to fix some of their fundamental problems. But at the same time, if you're not trying to do justice to the original material and you're willing to disregard a lot of integral elements that make them what they are, then are you even really trying to introduce that property to new audiences and earnestly hoping for them to become new fans? Or are you actually just taking advantage of the brand recognition and using that as a cheap way to guarantee safe audiences and evade the taxing job of promoting something new and having to build hype and reputation from the bottom, which is what original works have to go through? This is something that more so applies to reboots. With remakes, the reason why I'm a little more accepting is that I do acknowledge that old works have and always will face the problem of having technical limitations from their era, which will unfortunately make them come off as dated to a lot of people, including fans of those works. So when a remake comes along and has the straight goal of recreating the experience of the original material, but with some technical advantages, that is what I would consider a great contribution to its legacy. Now, of course, remakes can have their fair share of problems, like some elements not being able to fully translate well with modern techniques, and it's also more unforgiving when they decide to alter or add things that deviate from the original material that don't even really do much to improve the experience. But I'm still more open to the idea of remaking old works. Although even then, I don't necessarily think all of them need that treatment. In fact, I would say that for most of the classics with critical acclaim, I would more so encourage remasters than remakes, because frankly, I believe that if consumers want to engage with old classic works, it's more ideal to revisit them as they are because they were made specifically to be the way they are. And there are of course a lot of factors that affected its final product, a lot of them pertaining to the space and time they were in, but regardless, if you really want to do justice to those classic works, I think it's a lot more fair to consume them the way they are. And this is not even me trying to jump on the moral high ground, because I've also been guilty of disregarding original works to consume remakes. It's not even that I think people should be obligated to go to the original first. I believe everyone is responsible for how they want to spend their time, and if you have reasons to believe your time is better spent consuming a remake over its original, I think it's completely reasonable to make that decision. However, in my ideal world of creative expression, remakes of classic works that still hold up should not really even be a thing, and we should be more incentivized to shed light to new ideas instead of tampering with already existing works that don't even necessarily need a modern recreation. That's one of the reasons why gaming is the only medium where I have a smidge of approval of the idea of remakes, mostly of games that try to look as realistic as they could at the time, which I think is one of the reasons why the Resident Evil remakes are well liked, because the hyperrealism sort of fixed on obstacles that the old games had. Although the more abstract the art direction becomes, the more intolerant I become. With movies and television shows, I feel even more intolerant, especially if it's live action, because remaking something inevitably leads to changes in the staff and casting, which affects the overall presentation due to directorial differences. So many subtle things get lost in the process that I can't help but feeling cautious at the idea of a remake of anything. Especially the American remakes of foreign films. Like, honestly, I don't think they should even be a thing at all. I feel more or less the same when it comes to animated works, although I'm willing to say that they have a bigger opportunity to justify themselves due to technological advancements. Nevertheless, I see enough benefits with the idea of remakes that I can at least say I'm more or less okay with industries pushing them, although this does not apply at all to live action remakes of animated movies. Those can fuck off, and I'll never, ever support them. With all of that said, I don't feel as positively when it comes to reboots. Even if I were to give creators and producers of reboots the benefit of the doubt and assume that every creative decision made that's different from the original material isn't just some cynical attempt to cater to interests of modern audiences and ultimately bank on both the brand recognition and the trends that have been proven to be successful, but instead the changes are there because they genuinely believe they make the final product better for the vision that they earnestly want to bring to light. Even with that, I have to ask, why do you have to make a reboot? Why not just create a new project inspired by the alternative creative routes that you envision in your head when consuming the original works? This is actually not that uncommon. Peridot from Steven Universe was inspired by Zim, House Delgado is a parody of Ash from Evil Dead, Johnny English is a parody of James Bond, or how about the number of shows, movies, and games that have very clear inspirations and strive to build on the ideas that made the inspirational works interesting in the first place? No matter how you want to see it, the vast majority of the time, reboots, regardless if they're good or bad, could have existed in a form that didn't involve sharing the same brand as the works it was inspired by. And because of that, I inherently do not respect the idea of reboots. I don't necessarily think that reboots are always bad. It is possible for them to even be better than the original theoretically. Granted, I would argue that rarely happens, but I'm also going to be more inclined to want original ideas over reboots of old properties, and if you're gonna stick your nose into something that already has ground, I think it makes a lot of sense for you to primarily try to create something that can please the fans of the original. No, it doesn't mean making the exact same product, because that's a common misconception I hear from reboot defenders. They seem to think that any change means displeasing old fans. That's not at all the case. I honestly don't think fans of any property are that nitpicky. There are of course some people who are going to bitch and complain about every little thing that's different, and each fan is gonna have their own opinion on the worth and quality of that thing in question. But I think most fans are willing to see something different as long as they feel like it's doing justice to the original. And if most of them don't get that feeling, then the creators clearly fucked up. Obviously, no matter how well handled something might be, not everyone will be pleased by it and perspectives will vary. But this is something that applies to everything. In fact, I could make the same dispute against reboots that try to appeal to modern audiences by saying that not all reboots that attempt to do that succeed in satisfying all of the younger viewers. There are kids out there that hate stuff like Teen Titans Go and Thundercats Roar. Trust me, they do exist. And I could use that as an argument for why trying to appeal to all of the younger consumers is pointless, but I'm not gonna do that because I'm aware of the concepts of consensus and various perspectives. Furthermore, it's very possible to satisfy old fans even when you alter the material into something different. I mean, Mystery Incorporated and the 2017 DuckTales are very different from the original series, but they're still well beloved by fans, and many of them appreciate the love and respect it had for the original material and recognize their good judgment in taking elements that were integral from the old series and adding new elements that not only made them distinct, but also sticks to the heart of the original cartoons, some of them even saying that they supersede them. To me, that's what reboots should strive to do, and it's not even impossible to do that with the implementation of modern trends that can even attract modern audiences. You just have to find the right balance and know what calls to make. Anyway, I might as well respond to another common argument, which is that reboots should focus more on getting the attention of new audiences and that older fans already have the original that they can consume. Coupled with that is the idea that the newer generation is the most important demographic. In the case of animation, we're specifically talking about children as the main viewers, and adults would represent the least targeted demographic of the two. Now, here's the thing, I'm fully aware that I can consume the original, that's not the point. I'm not crying because my childhood was ruined. My problem is that by attaching its profitable name to the title, it is now a part of the legacy. If you're going to piggyback on the brand recognition, it is perfectly reasonable for old fans to demand proper treatment. They are the ones that made the original successful in the first place and have built a strong emotional connection with it. So it makes sense that they would ask for some level of consideration and priority. I'm not saying you should excessively pander to them or something, I'm just saying don't create something that clearly shits on and misunderstands the core elements of the original material, which are things that are only noticed by the fans. And if you're gonna argue that focusing more on younger viewers is more financially viable because they're the target demographic, look, I don't care at all about that. I give very little shit about what brings the most ratings. I am not a corporate overlord cucksucker who's concerned about what makes the most money for them. I'm an animation enthusiast. I'm driven by artistic integrity, and I don't appreciate when an old property is tempered and exploited for money, without even giving the respect to the roots and its fans that they very much deserve. Now, that doesn't mean I think no one is allowed to like the reboots. They do a poor job communicating with older fans, especially if you're one of the younger viewers who's new to the property. You have no obligation to be concerned for the legacy of the original material, and you're allowed to have your own set of opinions which are completely valid even if they contradict with the ones of the older fans. My intention isn't to be an authoritative asshole dictating what should and shouldn't exist or be enjoyed, but what I can say is that when I see something like the 2016 Powerpuff Girls reboot, I feel extremely offended, not just as a fan of the 1998 version, but also as someone who values its legacy, because this reboot violates that immensely. In terms of Thundercats Roar, I mean, I don't know much about the original series, and how much it deviates from it really doesn't affect my opinion of the series. I already explained in my review that in all likelihood, I would probably hate the 80s cartoons even more than this reboot. The only thing I can say is that based on my observations and what I've heard from other people describing the original Thundercats, this reboot does resemble a lot of the same creative corruptions that the Powerpuff Girls reboot also has. Not to say that it's as bad or that it's bad for the same reasons. What I'm saying is that a lot of my issues with reboots from an ideological viewpoint can be found in Thundercats Roar. And yeah, I agree with Enter. Reboots should try to please old fans. I mean, a lot of the times how much thought and consideration you put to what made the original connect with fans in the first place is what ends up determining the quality of the reincarnation. I've said this in the past, if something works as it is, once you break it into pieces and try to build something new, its effectiveness will vary immensely depending on how you try to piece it all together. And if that's not a big concern for you and you just want to take its assets and repackage into something that could be profitable to new viewers, then don't reboot it. Just create something new instead. Leave the past alone if you're not going to handle it with the respect it deserves. And if you do want to cater to the original fans, then do a better job. If you're really coming from a place of love and appreciation for the original, then you shouldn't have a hard time identifying with the needs of old fans. Adding a bunch of references and nods and only true fans will get it is not good enough. You have to handle the overall product carefully. And if you can't do that, and you just really don't care at all about doing justice to the original, then honestly, like, please hire someone else.